I need you to listen to me before this disappears. Before someone convinces me that these words should never reach you. Before this moment becomes another thing. We lost, because we were both too afraid to say what was truly inside our hearts. I don't know how much time I have before this is gone, but I know one thing: if you are seeing this right now, then maybe there is still a small piece of hope left between us. Maybe there is still a chance for you to understand what I was too afraid to explain when I had the opportunity. There are moments in life when you realize that silence is not protecting you anymore. It is destroying the very thing you were trying to save. I spent so much time believing that if I stayed strong, if I stayed composed, if I acted like nothing could break me, then I would somehow protect the people I loved. But I learned something painful. The strongest walls we build around ourselves are often the same walls that keep the person we love from reaching us, and I need you to know something. This was never about a perfect moment. It was never about having everything figured out before choosing you. Love doesn't arrive when everything is convenient. It arrives when you are standing in the middle of uncertainty, when you are afraid, when you know that opening your heart means giving someone the power to hurt you in a way nobody else can. And that is the part nobody talks about. The person who means the most to you is also the person who can make you feel the most vulnerable. Have you ever looked at someone you love and wondered if they truly understand how much they mean to you? Have you ever wanted to say something important, but the fear of losing them made you stay quiet? I know that feeling. I know what it feels like to carry words inside your chest, because you are terrified that once they leave your mouth, nothing will ever be the same again. I remember the moments when I wanted to tell you everything, not the easy things, not the beautiful things that anyone can say. I wanted to tell you about the fears I hide, the doubts I fight, and the nights when I wondered if I was becoming too distant from the person who mattered most, because sometimes the greatest tragedy is not losing someone after a fight. Sometimes it is slowly losing them while pretending everything is fine. You may have looked at me and thought I had all the answers. You may have believed that confidence meant I never questioned anything. But the truth is, the moments when I appeared the most certain were sometimes the moments when I was fighting the biggest battles inside myself. I was afraid that if you saw all of me, not just the achievements, not just the strength, not just the person everyone expects me to be, you would see the uncertainty too. And maybe that was my biggest mistake. Maybe I spent too much time trying to prove that I was someone worth loving, instead of simply allowing myself to be loved. Because love is not a competition where one person has to earn their place every day. Love is a decision two people make to see each other completely, including the broken places, the unfinished dreams, and the fears that we wish nobody would notice. But there is something I haven't told you. Something I kept hidden because I didn't know if you were ready to hear it. Something that changed the way I looked at everything between us. I kept telling myself that waiting was the mature choice, that holding back was the responsible choice, that protecting you from my truth was an act of love. But what if I was wrong? What if the thing I thought was protecting you was actually creating the distance I was most afraid of? What if every moment I stayed quiet was another moment you believed I didn't care? What if the person I was trying so hard not to lose was slowly walking away because I never gave her the one thing she truly needed from me? Honesty? I want you to think about something. How many times in your life have you waited for someone to finally say what was in their heart? How many times have you given someone another chance because a part of you believed there was still something worth saving? And how many times have you pretended you were okay when deep down you were just hoping someone would notice your silence? Because I noticed yours. I noticed the moments when your smile was there, but your heart looked tired. I noticed when you stopped asking certain questions because you were afraid of the answers. I noticed when you became quieter, when you stopped expecting promises, when you started protecting yourself from disappointment, and that is when I realized something that frightened me more than anything. Losing you would not happen in one dramatic moment. It would happen slowly. It would happen through small misunderstandings, through unsaid feelings, through two people who cared deeply but were too afraid to reach for each other. I don't want that ending for us, but I also know I cannot ask you to trust words alone. Words are easy when there is nothing at risk. The real test comes when your heart is exposed, when you have something valuable to lose, when you have to choose whether to step forward or remain behind the safety of your fears. And before you hear everything I need to tell you, I want you to know this. I am not sharing these words because I want sympathy. I am not saying them because I want you to forget every difficult moment. I am saying them because some truths become heavier the longer we carry them alone. If this message reached your heart in any way, stay with me a little longer. If you believe that some connections are worth fighting for, I would be grateful if you subscribed and stayed close for this journey. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? I want to know where this moment found you, because the truth I have been carrying is not something I ever planned to reveal this way. There is a reason I almost let this disappear. There is a reason I almost allowed someone else to decide that you should never hear these words. And that reason has everything to do with the one thing I feared the most. That I might finally tell you the truth when it was already too late. I spent so much time convincing myself that love could wait. I told myself that there would always be another day to explain, another opportunity to sit with you, and finally open the parts of my heart that I had kept locked away for so long. But life has a way of teaching us that time is not something we own. Sometimes the moment we think we can postpone forever becomes the moment we wish we could return to more than anything. And that is what scares me. Not the idea of being misunderstood, not even the possibility of being rejected. The thing that truly scares me is the thought that someone I deeply care about could walk away believing a version of the story that was never true. That you could leave carrying pain that I never wanted to cause. That you could believe you were not important enough, when the truth was that you mattered so much that I became afraid of how much power you had over my heart. I know that sounds strange. People think fear comes from losing things we don't care about. But sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes we become the most afraid when something matters so much that imagining life without it feels impossible. When someone becomes part of your future, their absence does not feel like a simple goodbye. It feels like an entire chapter of your life disappearing before you had the chance to finish writing it. And I need to admit something difficult. There were moments when I pushed you away, not because I wanted distance, but because I didn't know how to handle the closeness. I had spent so much of my life learning how to solve problems, how to create solutions, how to control outcomes. But you were not a problem to solve. Your heart was not something I could analyze and predict. Loving you meant accepting uncertainty. Hey, and that was something I was never prepared for. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that their happiness became connected to your own, but at the same time you felt terrified because you knew you could never completely protect them from pain? Have you ever wanted to promise someone forever, but hesitated because you understood that forever is not a word you can say casually? It is a responsibility. It is a choice you have to make again and again, especially on the days when emotions are difficult and the easy option is to walk away. I thought strength meant never showing weakness. I thought being dependable meant always having the right answer, but you taught me something I didn't understand before. Real strength is not standing above someone and pretending you have no wounds. Real strength is sitting beside someone and saying, "These are the parts of me I am afraid you will see, but I am trusting you enough to show them anyway." And there was a truth I kept hidden because I was afraid of what would happen after you heard it. I haven't told you the real reason yet. The reason I almost allowed this message to disappear was not because I stopped caring. It was because I cared more than I knew how to handle. There was a moment when I realized that if I finally opened my heart completely, I could no longer hide behind excuses. I could no longer pretend that silence was safer. I could no longer blame circumstances, timing, or distance. I would have to face the one question I had avoided for so long. What if I was the reason you started doubting my love? That thought stayed with me, because sometimes the person who hurts us is not someone who doesn't love us. Sometimes it is someone who loves us, but does not know how to communicate that love in the way we need. And I began wondering if I had become that person for you, someone who felt deeply, but expressed too little. Someone who cared endlessly, but made you question whether you mattered. And I know questions like that can quietly destroy a relationship. Not the dramatic arguments, not the moments where voices become louder. The most dangerous moments are the quiet ones, when someone starts asking themselves, "Am I still wanted here?" When they stop asking for reassurance because they are tired of needing it. When they stop reaching out because they are afraid their hand will remain unanswered. I saw that fear in you. I saw the hesitation in the way you looked at me. I saw the questions you never asked. I saw the moments when you wanted to believe me, but something inside you was protecting you from being disappointed again. And maybe I deserved that hesitation. Maybe I created some of those doubts without realizing how deeply they would affect you. But there is something I need you to understand. Every person has a place inside them where they hide the things they cannot explain. Mine was filled with fear. Fear of failing you. Fear of promising more than I could immediately prove. Fear that if I showed you my uncertainty, you would mistake it for a lack of love. But uncertainty was never the absence of love. Sometimes uncertainty exists because something matters too much. The hardest decisions in life are not difficult because we don't know what we want. They are difficult because we know exactly what we want, and we understand the risk involved in choosing it. Loving you was never the easy choice. It was the choice that required me to become more honest, more patient, and more willing to accept that another person's heart cannot be controlled. And then came the moment I thought I had lost you. Not in a dramatic goodbye. Not with anger. Not with a final conversation where everything was clearly ended. It was worse than that. It was the silence. The kind of silence where you feel someone slowly stepping away, where you realize they are no longer fighting to be understood because they are preparing themselves to let go. That moment broke something inside me, because I realized I could survive many failures in life. I could rebuild things. I could start over. I could face challenges that seemed impossible, but the thought of losing someone who knew the real person behind everything else, that was different. You were never just someone who stood beside me during the good moments. You were someone who saw the person underneath everything, the person who gets tired, the person who doubts, the person who wonders if he is giving enough to the people who mean the most. And maybe that is why losing you felt so frightening, because losing you would not only mean losing a relationship, it would mean losing the person who reminded me that beneath every ambition, every achievement, and every dream for the future, there is still a human heart that simply wants to be understood. But I still haven't told you everything. There is one final truth that I struggled with more than anything else. A truth that forced me to question whether I was brave enough to risk everything for love. And when you understand why I kept this hidden, you will understand why I almost let you believe I didn't care, because the truth was never that I was afraid of losing you. The truth was that I was afraid of finally admitting how much I needed you. The hardest truth I had to accept was that love was never supposed to make me feel powerful. It was supposed to make me honest. It was supposed to bring me to a place where I could stop pretending that I had everything under control, and finally admit that there was someone whose presence changed the way I saw the world. Someone whose happiness mattered to me in a way I could never measure. Someone whose absence created a silence that no achievement, no success, and no distraction could ever fill. I spent so much time trying to protect my heart that I forgot something important. A heart that is always protected can also become a heart that is never truly known. I wanted to avoid pain, but I didn't realize that avoiding pain also meant avoiding the deepest parts of love. Because real love is not found in the moments when everything is certain. Real love is found when two people look at all the uncertainty in front of them and still choose to move closer. And I finally understood why your doubts hurt me so much. It was not because I wanted to prove that you were wrong. It was because somewhere deep inside, I knew your doubts came from a place where I had failed to show you enough. I knew there were moments when you needed reassurance, and I gave you silence. Moments when you needed closeness, and I gave you distance. Moments when you needed my heart, and I gave you explanations. But you were never asking for perfection. You were asking to feel chosen. And that realization changed everything. Have you ever wondered how many relationships end, not because love disappears, but because two people become afraid to reveal how much they still care? Have you ever looked back at a moment and wished you had said one more sentence, given one more hug, stayed 5 more minutes, asked one more question instead of assuming you already knew the answer? I have thought about those moments more times than I can count. I thought about every time I could have been more open, every time I could have put my pride aside, every time I could have looked at you and simply said, I am scared too, but I don't want to lose you. Because maybe that was the sentence you needed to hear. Maybe you didn't need someone who never struggled. Maybe you needed someone brave enough to admit that they struggled and still wanted to stay. The truth I was hiding was not a secret about you. It was a secret about me. I was afraid that if you saw how deeply I cared, you would also see how deeply you could hurt me. I was afraid of giving someone that much importance, because losing something that valuable would leave a wound. I couldn't easily explain. So instead of risking vulnerability, I built distance. Instead of saying, I need you, I tried to prove that I needed no one. But that was never strength. That was fear wearing the disguise of strength. And the moment I realized that, everything became clear. The person I was trying to protect myself from losing was the same person I was accidentally pushing away. I was so focused on avoiding the pain of goodbye that I was creating the conditions for goodbye to happen. That is the cruelest thing about fear. Sometimes it convinces us that we are saving something while it quietly takes it away from us. I want you to know something I should have said much earlier. You were never a weakness in my life. You were never a distraction from my dreams. You were never someone who made me less focused, less ambitious, or less determined. You were the reminder that all the things we build, all the things we chase, and all the things we accomplish only have meaning when there is someone we can share them with. Because at the end of everything, what do we really remember? Not the moments when we look successful to the world. We remember the person who stayed when nobody else saw our struggles. We remember the person who believed in us when we questioned ourselves. We remember the person whose voice could calm a storm inside us without even trying. And you were that person for me. I know I cannot erase every moment when you felt alone. I cannot go back and rewrite every conversation. I cannot remove every doubt you carried because of my mistakes. But I can finally stand here with honesty and tell you what I should have told you before. I never wanted a perfect love. I wanted a real one. A love where we could admit when we were scared. A love where we could apologize without keeping score. A love where we could grow older together and still look at each other with the same curiosity we had at the beginning. A love where we didn't run when things became difficult, but instead asked, how do we fix this together? Because the person you choose in the difficult moments is the person who truly matters. Anyone can stay when life is easy. Anyone can promise forever when there are no challenges. But the real question is what happens when fear arrives? What happens when misunderstandings appear? What happens when both people are tired and neither knows who should reach out first? That is where love reveals itself. And I need you to know that if there was ever a moment when you wondered whether you mattered, the answer was always yes. If there was ever a moment when you questioned whether you were loved, the answer was always yes. If there was ever a moment when you thought I was walking away because you were not enough, the truth was the opposite. You mattered so much that I became afraid. You were enough from the beginning. The thing I had to learn was that love is not about finding someone who completes an empty space inside you. It is about finding someone who inspires you to become more honest, more compassionate, and more human. Someone who reminds you that even the strongest people need someone they can trust. And maybe that is what this message was always meant to be. Not a final goodbye, not a desperate attempt to change the past, but a reminder that some people enter our lives and leave a mark so deep that pretending they never mattered becomes impossible. If you are still here listening, then maybe you understand what I am trying to say. Maybe you have your own words you never said. Maybe there is someone you still think about. Maybe there is a conversation you wish you could have. Maybe there is a person you miss, not because they were perfect, but because something about them felt like home. So I want to ask you something. If the person you loved was standing in front of you today and you had only one chance to speak honestly, what would you finally tell them? Would you tell them you missed them? Would you tell them you were hurt? Would you tell them you were scared? Or would you finally tell them that despite everything, your heart never truly stopped choosing them? Because sometimes the greatest regrets in life are not the things we did. They are the words we carried until it was too late. I almost let this disappear because I thought protecting myself was more important than revealing my heart. But I understand now that the greatest risk was never loving you. The greatest risk was allowing fear to decide our ending. And if there is one thing I hope you remember from this moment, it is this: never let fear speak louder than love. Never let pride become stronger than forgiveness. Never let silence take the place of the words someone's heart has been waiting to hear. Because the most valuable things in life are not built by avoiding risk. They are built by having the courage to choose what truly matters.